Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and welcome to Genre Benders, Obscurities, and Flawed Gems, where we look at the best stuff you've never heard of. Today's subject requires a bit of backstory before we get into the details. In 1999, Gamera 3: The Incomplete Struggle ended the Flying Turtles popular reboot trilogy on a massive cliffhanger, and this left a lot of fans disappointed. They wanted a more satisfying conclusion to the story, but director Shusuke Kaneko appeared to be done and ready to move on. This prompted comedian Shinpei Hayashiya to direct his own independent sequel, Gamera 4: Truth. Unfortunately, since it wasn't officially sanctioned by Daiei, it's tied up in all sorts of red tape that prevents it from ever getting an official home video release. The only way you could ever hope to see it is to keep your eye on film festivals and hope it's playing. Those who did manage to see it, however, declared that it was great, and this encouraged Hayashiya to try his hand at making another kaiju film. This one an original property that he could own and distribute without any concern. The result of this endeavor is a film originally named Deep Sea Monster Reigo vs. the Battleship Yamato, but it has recently been imported to America by SRS Cinema as Reigo King of the Sea Monsters. Whatever you choose to call it, the film is finally available stateside. So is this indie kaiju film worthy of adding to your collection? Let's find out. It's 1943, the middle point of World War II, and the Japanese Navy is launching its new flagship vessel, the battleship Yamato. This mighty craft sets sail to fight for the glory of the Empire, but quickly finds itself facing a different threat. The vessel fires upon what it thinks is an American submarine, but is actually the offspring of a sea monster which local legends call Reigo. Though the crew do not initially believe the legend, they soon find themselves beset upon by the ravenous bonefish who swim alongside the dragon before the beast himself emerges. Reigo is enraged that his offspring was killed, and now has it in for the Yamato and any ship that dares to cross his path. So let's start by addressing the obvious. Reigo is a low-budget movie, and it shows. The special effects tend to be inconsistent, with a stark contrast between the digital stuff and the practical stuff, and a soundtrack that was obviously done with synthesizers. I know the movie is an independent feature and thus had less money to work with, but this only serves to explain the inconsistencies rather than excuse them. The movie was deemed worthy for wide release as a proper film, and thus is open to scrutiny. As such, I can't just ignore that the effects are inconsistent. Lest you think I'm being unfair, though, I will say that with this acknowledgement accounted for, the film looks far better than you might expect. Sure, the digitally rendered Yamato itself looks a bit cartoony, but the practically realized Reigo looks great. Clearly most of the money went to making the armature, and boy does it pay off. Reigo looks good enough to appear in any Godzilla film from the era. Besides which, the original Godzilla didn't exactly have consistent effects either, but effects aren't necessarily the be-all and end-all for judging a kaiju movie. What the film lacks in polish, it makes up for with dialogue, characters, and themes. The story is pretty straightforward, serving as a semi-alternate history in which Japan's most famous battleship is pitted against a sea monster upon its initial launching. That simplicity makes for easy accessibility and also helps the film avoid any political undercurrents like those found in certain other movies. Sure, given the time period, it is a fairly militaristic film harkening back to the days of the Empire, but that isn't really what the movie is about. Rather, it's about mythology. It takes the Yamato, which is already legendary in its own right, and spins a new legend around it. Only instead of turning it into a spaceship, we instead see the crew become classic heroes in battle against a dragon more powerful than anything they could imagine. It's all meant to have a fantastical quality to it, and nowhere is this more evident than the ending, which evokes imagery of kabuki theater as history and myth are blended together in a surreal manner. If you must assign a historic metaphor to it, then yes, you could say Reigo represents the United States in opposition to the Japanese Empire. But if that was the intention, the perspective is a very objective one. By this, I mean the movie doesn't really take sides by portraying either party of its central conflict as fully good or evil. Reigo ravages the Japanese Navy without mercy, yes, but only because the Yamato shot first, wounding and possibly killing his offspring. I say possibly because there are sequels, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. On the other hand, the crew of the Yamato is comprised of likable individuals that we really don't want to see killed. Basically, this isn't a battle of ideology or morality. Reigo wants revenge, and the Yamato crew simply wants to survive. Both sides are understandable, but since a compromise isn't possible between the two, we in the audience can only sit by and watch the battle unfold, soaking in the tragedy of this senseless conflict between entities who shouldn't have been enemies in the first place. Man, that all sounds pretty heavy, doesn't it? Thankfully, this movie is not a self-pitying drama. Shinpei Hayashiya is a comedian after all, and the movie has an excellent sense of humor that adds variety to its tone. Much of the comedy has a classic, almost vaudevillian style to it, making use of routines and jokes that build over time, each one of them delivered in a way that transcends cultural differences. Japanese humor and American humor, respectively, rely on different things to get a laugh, so they rarely translate well into each other. The comedy in Reigo is, however, universal, and genuinely funny to boot. Some of it is kind of random though, like the guy with the eye patch whose every move is accompanied by an out-of-place sound effect. I have no answer. I don't know if he's literally making those sounds and everyone around him is just used to it, or if they're the sounds he hears himself making in his own head. Maybe this is an inside joke I just don't understand. All I know is that it's in the movie. Something must also be said about Reigo's design, which is unique among kaiju. Rather than go for a traditional humanoid approach, Reigo instead has a body built for water, looking somewhat like a fusion of a dinosaur and a shark. We only see him in full a couple of times, but it's a design that's instantly recognizable, and it proves to be surprisingly effective in combat. It's one I'm sure many kaiju fans would love a physical representation of for their collections. The design would be replaced with something more familiar to the genre as the sequels moved on to the land, but for this initial film, it works great for a maritime conflict. While we're at it, the bonefish that accompany Reigo have a cool design as well, and it's too bad that they gradually become less important to the film as it proceeds. I'm pretty sure they were meant to play a larger role so as to strengthen the parallel between the two sides of this fight. Had they stuck around longer and done more, it would have created a dynamic where both Reigo and the Yamato are the juggernauts leading their respective fleets into battle. Alas, the bonefish were likely diminished in role for budgetary reasons. Their eventual absence doesn't really hurt the movie, but we can only wonder what might have been had they stuck around longer. So Reigo faced some production limitations, but it overcame those limitations to become a darn good film. The very existence of this movie should be an inspiration to any aspiring artist looking to move on from fan work to original content. Even stuff that lacks polish can still be well received when it's made with sincerity and passion, and this movie is evidence of that. Reigo may not have the same resources as Godzilla or Gamera, but I still think he deserves to stand alongside them as an equal. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. I wonder if I can do that sound effect thing. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.